A black hole gets its name because it has enormously concentrated mass that prohibits any nearby objects, even light, from eluding its gravitational attraction. This is clearly an explanatory paragraph whose subject is black holes. Let's start from the bottom up in reading this time. T, the required velocity to narrowly escape and enter orbit, is known as the escape velocity. So right here my question is the required velocity. What required velocity? The first topic sentence doesn't really talk about a velocity per se. So I can eliminate T. Often we see the subject or the object, which is not presented in the preceding sentence or sentences and can therefore be eliminated. Let's move on to Q. If, however, you could fire the armament fast enough, then you could make it escape the Earth's gravity. Well, now here actually we're introducing the idea of escaping Earth's gravity, so that might make sense that T would follow in the context somehow. But again, we're talking about the armament. So what armament is the first question I would have? Oftentimes, when you see the object, the first question is what object is that sentence referring to from the first sentence? So oftentimes they can be eliminated. Moving on, S, shoot a cannon up into the air from the Earth's surface, and you'll expect to see the cannonball arcing back down to the surface at some distant point. Well, here we are introducing a cannon, which is not mentioned in the first or topic sentence, but in this case we're introducing the cannon. It's not referring to the cannon as though it were referred to already, and we're following up on that idea, this specific cannon that was mentioned previously. We're introducing the cannon, so this is very different. S is actually a possibility for a first follow-on if we want to look for that first. U, the mass of a black hole, for example, is so concentrated that its escape velocity is even greater than the speed of light. Well, that is actually essentially a repetition of the first sentence. A black hole gets its name because it has enormously concentrated mass, exactly what U says, that prohibits even light from escaping. And U refers to something new that's slightly different than the first topic sentence, escape velocity. And we haven't seen escape velocity introduced or defined in the first sentence. So a repetition really is often in a conclusion. When you make a conclusion or a concluding sentence in a paragraph or a concluding paragraph in an essay, you're often just reiterating or restating the points you originally made in the thesis. So this looks curiously like a concluding sentence. R. Of course, mass is critical, and a more massive planet requires a much higher speed to permanently exit into space. The first topic sentence introduces the idea of mass, but it says nothing about a planet or more massive planets. So that is actually something new, not mentioned in the first sentence, that isn't really being introduced here. The idea being introduced is that mass is critical to exit into space. So I would not include R as a possible follow-on. So out of all the options, actually really S, shoot a cannon up into the air from the Earth's surface, is really the only option for the first follow-on. That said, if we now look at these sentences, we essentially have two concepts at work here. One talking about shooting a cannon and seeing the cannonball come back down to Earth. And that cannonball is what the armament in Q seems to be referring to. If, however, you could shoot that armament or cannonball fast enough, then you can make it escape Earth's gravity and exit out into space, essentially. So those look like they belong as a paired sentence, S then Q. And then the other three sentences don't really talk about the cannonball, but they talk about that idea of exiting and exit velocity. So those are clearly a group that probably comes after the SQ. And if we look at that, a very important sentence among those is T. The required velocity to narrowly escape and enter orbit is known as the escape velocity. Here we are not only introducing escape velocity, but we're defining escape velocity. And that often happens in explanatory paragraphs. Something is defined, and then you'll have follow-on examples to provide more detail or more information about that escape velocity or whatever is being defined. And that's clear here in R and U. R says, of course, mass is critical, and a more massive planet requires a much higher speed to exit permanently into space. So that escape velocity has to be higher if the planet or object is more massive. So that's a specific detail about escape velocity as a follow-up to T. And then U is an even more specific detail about the escape velocity itself. It says the mass of a black hole, so now we're using this specific example of a black hole, for example, and it even says, for example, is so concentrated that its escape velocity is even greater than the speed of light. So I like the order S, Q, T, R, and U.